everyone, and welcome to God's Plan, Your Part, a podcast where our goal is to read the entire Bible in a year, seeking to understand God's plan of redemption while discovering daily and practically your part in it.
Hey guys, welcome to God's Plan, Your Part. Today we're looking at Numbers chapter 18 to 20. Fun fact, by the time we get to chapter 20, the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness is almost over. So in like 7 chapters, we've covered 40 years.
I mean, to be totally honest, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to miss though. Like it's like, oh wait, they were already there wandering around? So in 18 and 19, we get some laws for priests basically. And in 20, we get like this whole story about how Moses and Aaron end up not being allowed to go into the promised land. So what would you like to cover today?
I prefer to talk about or cover things that are going on in chapter 20 just because it's more of a narrative passage and it's easier to follow the storyline. But I think there is probably some kind of something that we can glean from these other two
It feels
chapters.
bad to skip 2 chapters, right? I think one of the things that I think we've actually read several times and have not actually talked about is this concept of tithing. Basically in the Old Testament, I think this carries over to New Testament, it carries over to today, you'll hear about tithing in churches. But God sets up a law, basically, that you must tithe on the things that you have. And what that means, it's just a fancy word for giving a tenth, the first 10. So the people are required to commit to God the first 10 of everything that they have.
Well, and also it's the best of everything that they have.
Correct.
Too. So like whenever like the firstborn or whatever opens the womb, they always say that needs to be set apart.
So that is committed
the
to the Lord,
yes.
or it needs to be redeemed before the Lord. They're supposed to give like grain. They're supposed to give money. And basically what this is doing is there's the spiritual and there's the practical. The first thing that it's doing is recognizing that everything you have is because God gave it to you. And so this is like baked into the culture that God is blessing them. We've seen that throughout Exodus and Leviticus about how God has agreed to bless his people. And so tithing is a way to say, hey, God has blessed you. You have this because God gave it to you. And so you are going to give a tenth of it back. Basically like thanking the Lord for what he's done, but also recognizing that he will continue to provide. So it is a faith-building exercise. It is a worshipful exercise. And then on the practical side, you have all these Levites who are working like the office of priests. They're either like guarding the outside of the tabernacle or they're working in the courts of the tabernacle. And they don't have jobs. Like their job is to be priests. And so the practical side of this is that this actually supports and pays for the people that are the Levites to care for their families. And so the Levites get to eat some of these sacrifices. The Levites get paid basically with this tithe money.
Is that what they're referring to in 18 verse 26, where it says, when you take the tithe from the people of Israel that I have given you from them for your inheritance, you shall present a contribution of it to the Lord, a tithe of the tithe. So is that...
The Levites themselves are required to tithe on the money, on the possessions that they've been given. So that is the tithe of the tithe. Like what they have is simply because Israel gave it, but they then are required to give that to the Lord. So it's the tithe on the tithe. It's like kind of weird to say, but...
God tax.
It could be a God tax, yeah. So a question that I have heard before is basically like, is tithing still required? Because it is called out in the Old Testament and we are under a new covenant of Jesus' blood. So do we still have to tithe? And actually, I think the scandalous answer is we're actually called to an even higher standard than the tithe. Do you have thoughts on this?
Why do you say that?
In the New Testament, like especially in the early church, they basically like held everything loosely together. There's plenty of stories of people selling essentially almost everything they had to support the mission of Jesus, to support the mission of the church. And so the New Testament concept of giving is way more radical, I think, than the Old Testament concept.
Is that why Jesus uses the example of the woman who she like literally has nothing?
Oh, the widow's mite?
Yes.
She just like, she dropped a tiny little amount in the offering, and then there's all these rich people that drop in like huge amounts, and Jesus basically says, hey, this woman gave everything she had. These rich people have plenty, they just gave a little bit. It is a concept of investing in something that's of kingdom value. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount basically says, hey, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. So don't store up treasures here on earth where moth and rust will destroy them. Store up treasures in heaven. So I think that is like investment language. It's like, seek first the kingdom of God. We do that with our money. We do.
Everything you keep saying are like all these little kid songs that I remember. Oh, that's 2 times. Okay, anyway.
So giving is a pretty significant concept to our faith today. Your church might use tithe language. Your church might use first fruits language, but we are asked to support what the Lord is doing with our money. And it's a faith building thing. It's an act of worship. It's an act of obedience.
Yeah, I agree. So then we start talking more about laws for purification in chapter 19. And something that like literally keeps sticking out to me over and over again, I keep hearing it, is not touching a dead person. Because it will make you unclean. And I just like, I guess with like burying individuals, I suppose that was probably like where that comes from. But it just seems like such a weird thing to call out. Like I just think of people going around like touching stuff they shouldn't. But that one, it keeps coming out over and over again.
So why? Strange.
But also, I was also thinking about death. Right? Is that where you're going with this? Wait, that's not where you're going.
Go ahead, go.
I was just going to say, like, death is the ultimate separation from God if... Yeah, is that what you're thinking?
Well, I mean, death is the consequence of sin. And so death oftentimes represents like the fruit of sin.
Okay.
But what I was going to ask you is, why are they wandering in the wilderness? They're wandering in the wilderness...
Because they were disobedient.
Because they were disobedient, and that entire generation needed to die off. And so there's a lot of people that are dying because God said, hey, you are going to wander around in this wilderness until your generation has passed on so that your next generation can go. So it's not totally surprising that there's all these rules about what to do with a dead person because they are a wandering people.
Well, unless they get swallowed up in the earth, which, then they don't have to worry about it.
Then you don't have to worry about it. Or burned up in a fire or... So the literal purpose that they're wandering around is so that a generation passes away because they've been judged by God. So they need rules for what to do about this.
Well, yeah, because it said in the previous chapters that they that certain generation would not enter the promised land anyway.
And you can read the Bible and be like, why are there all these rules for what to do with the dead person? But there's actually still lots of rules today about what to do with a dead person. And so it is just like establishing like a standard. It's establishing healthy decisions. And then there is spiritual significance in that you don't want to bring death before the Lord. You want to be clean when you enter into him into his sanctuary. So
okay, the next thing that I was thinking about, now that we're kind of beyond that, we look at chapter 20. We see the death of Miriam, which seems significant.
It is
some
significant.
of these characters I'm like super like bought into and excited to hear about their story. But like Miriam dies. She was a huge piece of the Exodus story. We keep moving forward, and freaking Moses and Aaron. I read this chapter today, and as I was reading through, Moses and Aaron are supposed to go down and release water from a rock because the Israelites are grumbling. Okay, this is God's instruction. And as I kept reading, they went down. Moses gets his staff, whacks the rock, and water starts coming out. And I was confused in the next part of the story because God basically tells them, like, you didn't believe that I would do what I said I would do, so you too will not enter the land that I promised. And it made me stop because I was like, wait, they did do what God asked, but I actually didn't even catch it myself. The original instructions for Moses and Aaron was to tell the rock to produce water for the people. And I'm assuming there was some kind of doubt or something that we were talking about earlier, Ryan and I were, that when they went to the actual rock, instead of just telling the rock to produce water, he used his staff to hit the rock instead and make the water flow. And it did come, but like it began to flow and all the things, everybody was super happy to have water. but ultimately they were punished for not trusting that God would do what he said. So what a bummer. Like, you made it the whole way and then you ended up just disobeying yourself. Like, come on. That's such a bummer. So, yeah.
It does seem like from reading Numbers chapter 20 that God has a higher standard for Moses and Aaron. Mm-hmm. These people have literally been grumbling all the time, and Moses and Aaron make one mistake, and they're barred from the promised land. I mean, they've made a few mistakes.
I was going to say, they've made their fair share.
But they are the ones that are representing the Lord to the people, and so it does actually make sense that there is a higher standard on them. And so God says, "Hey, I want you to talk to the rock." For some reason, like, we just have this tiny little snippet that's important to remember too. Like, these are real people with real feelings and motivations and like attitudes, all those things. Yeah. Moses and Aaron, I guess, strike the rock instead of speaking to the rock, and that causes them to be barred from the promised land. So I think, to me, being a pastor, like, there's a high standard put on people who choose to represent God, people who are called to represent God.
Yeah.
And I think God does actually hold us to a pretty high standard. That's why. I mean, how many pastors have we seen fall because they made terrible life choices, or they're secretly living in sin?
Too many.
And it's a scandalous thing, because it's like, oh my word, you're literally supposed to be representing God and you're hiding your sin. Mm-hmm. So Moses and Aaron, I think we just have this little tiny snippet of what's going on. I think there's something much bigger going on. And I think God is like, hey, you're not going to be walking into the promised land because of what you've done. The other interesting thing is that this is the new generation. So the last time you'll actually see chapter 20, verse 1, and the people of Israel and the whole congregation came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month. The last time we saw the wilderness of Zin is when in chapter 13, where Moses sent the spies into the promised land. So those people have all died off from chapter 13. It's been 40 years. This is a new group of people, and that, like, basically, like, that first generation's kids.
They're just as human as the
last ones. And they are grumbling again. So they have not learned from the mistakes of the generation before them. Oh, man.
Which is so disappointing, because, again, we're finally here. And then we end with what seems to just be kind of, like, just really disheartening. So Aaron also dies, another, like, key character in the story of Exodus. But when he is taken up to the mountain, his robes, his things are being taken away and given to his son, Eleazar, I guess, to just kind of pass the torch.
Yeah, I don't think it's like a punishment thing. I think it's just instituting a new person in that office of a high priest.
But isn't it so sad, though? Like,
it is sad.
He's not allowed to enter. He's going to die on this mountain. Here's the robes for the next guy, and you're never going to see it.
So don't forget, when Aaron dies, like, that is the guy that stood in front of Pharaoh. That is the guy that, like, God, I mean, Moses and Aaron together, but that is one of the guys that was used by God in a significant way. And so he has now passed on. It won't be too long until Moses does the same. And we'll be looking at a whole new generation of Israelites. So as we're reading over these chapters, Jenny, what do you think is a good takeaway for today?
Well, I think for sure it comes back again to me for just trusting God in situations where even sometimes, like, you have that feeling that you know what God requires of you or what he is asking of you, but you still say no, and you still kind of just take do your version of it. I think it's really hard to go out on a limb when it feels kind of crazy. But I think some of our probably most impactful moments of doing things on behalf of the Lord are the ones that, I don't know, they just make the most sense and are just like, wow, I'm so glad that I, like, took that nudging or whatever to do what God asked.
I was thinking about that idea of obedience. Like, if you put yourself in Moses' shoes, what God is asking him to do is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
So in front of this giant group of people, I would like you to speak to this stone. And Moses has seen many miracles. Like, he has seen God do many, many, many things. And so it's not out of the ordinary for God to tell him to do something miraculous.
I had an instance one time where I had bought a meal for someone whose name was Danielle. and I knew that she was in a rough spot. I bought the meal for her, and I was like so excited to take it to her. I went to her house, and I stood on the front porch for a long time, and nobody was there. I was like, but God, I literally heard him say to me, Danielle, over and over and over again. And when she didn't answer the door, I was like, but God, I literally thought that you said to do this. So I felt really dumb. Like, I thought I heard what the Lord was saying. I went to school the next day, and a little girl who was in my class, her name was also Danielle, but she had told me that, like, a story about her mom was identical to what had gone on with this other Danielle that I knew. And she said that it was just really hard on her family. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure that this meal was for Danielle. I just didn't realize which Danielle it was. So it felt really dumb at first, like following through, like, okay, maybe that was just a waste of my time. But in reality, it was actually like it was meant for the other Danielle, which was so crazy. I actually talked to her mom about it. It was a really cool story how it all shook out. But yeah, just like following those promptings, no matter how ridiculous it seems. Yeah. So
seems like we should do a bonus episode at some point about how you even know what those promptings are, or how you know that it's God saying something.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that'll be in the future at some point. But it's important to be obedient to what the Lord has called you to do. And sometimes he does give you prompting. Sometimes he just tells us in his word. Like, God speaks to us many different ways. So we just encourage you to find ways to be obedient today. So we'll see you tomorrow. Hey, thanks so much for listening to our take on God's Word. Stick around and listen to the Word on the second part of the podcast. Before we get in there, we just want to remind you, you can connect with us at any time on social media and YouTube at God's Plan, Your Part. Also, we are a listener-supported podcast, so if you ever want to help us out with the ministry that we're doing, you can do that by clicking the link in our description. And now, here's the reading for today. Numbers chapter 18. So the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons and your father's house with you shall bear iniquity connected with the sanctuary. And you and your sons with you shall bear iniquity connected with your priesthood. And with you bring your brothers also, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, that they may join you and minister to you while you and your sons with you are before the tent of the testimony. They shall keep guard over you and over the whole tent, but shall not come near to the vessels of the sanctuary or to the altar, lest they and you die. They shall join you and keep guard over the tent of meeting for all the service of the tent, and no outsider shall come near you. And you shall keep guard over the sanctuary and over the altar, that there may never again be the wrath on the people of Israel. And behold, I have taken your brothers the Levites from among the people of Israel. They are a gift to you, given to the Lord, to do the service of the tent of meeting. And you and your sons with you shall guard your priesthood for all that concerns the altar and that within the veil, and you shall serve. I give your priesthood as a gift, and any outsider who comes near shall be put to death. Then the Lord spoke to Aaron, behold, I have given you charge over the contributions made to me, all the consecrated things of the people of Israel. I have given them to you, as a portion, and to your sons as a perpetual due. This shall be yours of the most holy things, reserved from the fire. Every offering of theirs, every grain offering of theirs, and every sin offering of theirs, and every guilt offering of theirs, which they render to me, shall be most holy to you and your sons. In a most holy place you shall eat it. Every male may eat it, it is holy to you. This is also yours, the contribution of their gift. All the wave offerings of the people of Israel I have given them to you, and to your sons and daughters with you as a perpetual due. Everyone who is clean in your house may eat it. All the best of the oil, and all the best of the wine and of the grain. The first fruits of what they give to the Lord I give to you. The first ripe fruits of all that is in their land, which they bring to the Lord, shall be yours. Everyone who is clean in your house may eat it. Every devoted thing in Israel shall be yours. Everything that opens the womb of all flesh, whether man or beast, which they offer to the Lord, shall be yours. Nevertheless, the firstborn of man you shall redeem, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. And the redemption price, at a month old you shall redeem them. You shall fix it 5 shekels in silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs. But the firstborn of a cow, or the firstborn of a sheep, or the firstborn of a goat, you shall not redeem. They are holy. You shall sprinkle their blood on the altar, and shall burn their fat as a good offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But their flesh shall be yours, all the breast that is waved, and as the right thigh as yours. All the holy contributions that the people of Israel present to the Lord I give to you, and to your sons and daughters with you as a perpetual due. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord for you and your offspring with you. And the Lord said to Aaron, you shall have no inheritance in their land, neither shall you have any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the people of Israel. To the Levites I have given every tithe in Israel for an inheritance, in return for their service that they do, their service in the tent of meeting, so that the people of Israel do not come near the tent of meeting, lest they bear sin and die. But the Levites shall do the service of the tent of meeting, and they shall bear their iniquity. It shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generations, and among the people of Israel they shall have no inheritance. For the tithe of the people of Israel, which they present as a contribution to the Lord, I have given to the Levites for an inheritance. Therefore I have said of them that they shall have no inheritance among the people of Israel. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Moreover, you shall speak, and say to the Levites, when you take from the people of Israel the tithe that I have given you from them for your inheritance, then you shall present a contribution from it to the Lord, a tithe of the tithe. And your contribution shall be counted to you as though it were the grain of the threshing floor, and as the fullness of the winepress. So you shall also present a contribution to the Lord from all your tithes, which you receive from the people of Israel, and from it you shall give the Lord's contribution to Aaron the priest. Out of all the gifts to you, you shall present every contribution due to the Lord, from each its best part to be dedicated. Therefore you shall say to them, when you have offered from it the best of it, then the rest shall be counted to the Levites as produce of the threshing floor, and as produce of the winepress. And you may eat it in any place, you and your households, for it is your reward in return for your service in the tent of meeting. And you shall bear no sin by reason of it, when you have contributed the best of it. But you shall not profane the holy things of the people of Israel, lest you die. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, This is the statute of the law that the Lord has commanded. Tell the people of Israel to bring you a red heifer without defect, in which there is no blemish, and on which a yoke has never come. And you shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and it shall be taken outside the camp and slaughtered before him. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, and sprinkle some of its blood toward the front of the tent of the meeting 7 times. And the heifer shall be burned in his sight. Its skin, its flesh, and its blood, with its dung, shall be burned. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet yarn, and throw them into the fire, burning the heifer. Then the priest shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterwards he may come into the camp. But the priest shall be unclean until evening. The one who burns the heifer shall wash his clothes in water and bathe his body in water, and shall be unclean until evening. And a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place. And they shall be kept for the water for impurity for the congregation of the people of Israel. It is a sin offering. And the one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And this shall be a perpetual statute for the people of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns among them. Whoever touches the dead body of any person shall be unclean for 7 days. He shall cleanse himself with the water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and so be clean. But if he does not cleanse himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he will not become clean. Whoever touches a dead person, the body of anyone who has died, and does not cleanse himself, defiles the tabernacle of the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from Israel. Because the water for impurity was not thrown on him, he shall be unclean. His uncleanness is still on him. This is the law when someone dies in a tent. Everyone who comes into the tent, and everyone who is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. And every open vessel that has no cover fastened on it is unclean. Whoever in the open field touches someone who was killed with a sword, or who died naturally, or touches a human bone, or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. For the unclean they shall take some ashes of the burnt sin offering, and fresh water shall be added in a vessel. Then a clean person shall take hyssop and dip it in the water and sprinkle it on the tent and all the furnishings and on all the persons who were there, and on whoever touched the bone or the slain or the dead or the grave. And the clean person shall sprinkle it on the unclean on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Thus on the 7th day he shall cleanse him, and he shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and at evening he shall be clean. If the man who is unclean does not cleanse himself, that person shall be cut off from the midst of the assembly, because he has defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. Because the water for impurity has not been thrown on him, he is unclean, and it shall be a statute forever for them. The one who sprinkles the water for impurity shall wash his clothes, and the one who touches the water for impurity shall be unclean until evening. And whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and anyone who touches it shall be unclean until evening."
And the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the 1st month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us into this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared around them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them, and give drink to the congregation and their cattle." And Moses took the staff from before the Lord, as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy." Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. "Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardship we have met, how our fathers went down to Egypt and lived in Egypt a long time. And the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our fathers. And when we cried out to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel and brought us out of Egypt. And here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your territory. Please let us pass through your land. We will not pass through field or vineyard or drink water from a well. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory." But Edom said to him, "You shall not pass through, lest I come out with the sword against you." And the people of Israel said to him, "We will go up by the highway, and if we drink your water, I and my livestock, then I will pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more." But he said, "You shall not pass through." And Edom came out against them with a large army and with a strong force. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory, so Israel turned away from him. And they journeyed from Kadesh, and the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came to Mount Hor. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor, on the border of the land of Edom, "Let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land that I shall give to the people of Israel, because you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up to Mount Hor. And strip Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and shall die there." Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. And Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. And when all the congregation saw that Aaron had perished, all the house of Israel wept for Aaron 30 days.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.